screen and start from there. Okay. Can you see the slides? Okay. So we were, in the last class we were discussing about some introductory stuff about rice production in Sri Lanka, right? We showed some data, right? We had a look at the data and the trend, right? How the cultivated area and the yield, right, behaves in the last few decades, right? So some of you asked that whether they have to draw these graphs, right, in the exam. No, right? The answer is no, right? Because I just want you to have an understanding about how the rice production trend is there in our country, right? It's very important, right? You are studying a staple crop, right? So you should know, right? Little bit about the history and then how our performance in terms of production and yield. Okay. So for that, I presented these graphs. And also I just want to show that how that fertilizer requirement played a critical role in increasing rice production in the country, right? So that's all I want to show you, but you don't need to, remember this graph, but at least you should know the trend, right? How it behaved, right? And then how, what is our current performance, right? In terms of these numbers, right? That's it. So are there any other questions you have from the previous classes? Any questions? So the person asked the question, are you all right now? Can you please respond? Hello? Hello, students. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So, so it's better you talk, right? It's okay that you ask questions through chat, but when I ask whether you understood or not, it's better you unmute yourself and talk, right? Please don't hesitate to talk, okay? Because that will, time to time help me to understand whether the connection is okay. We are connected remotely now. So I just want to check whether the connection is okay. Otherwise, it's waste of time, right? Okay. So then we had a little bit the introductory stuff regarding the cropping intensity, and then we move to the rice growing ecosystems, right? How the major ecosystems are classified. So we said that, right? They are mainly classified based on the water regimes, right? Water availability. Right, there we studied the upland rice and then rain-fed lowland rice cultivation, and then irrigated rice, and then flood-prone rice, or the rice cultivation in the tidal wetlands, right? So those are the stuff we have covered in the last class. All right, so today we are moving to the rice crop improvement, right? How the rice crop has been improved to increase its yield and other performances in the country. Right, before we go there, right, let's have a look on the classification of rice varieties, right? This classification is especially in Sri Lanka, right? Applicable to Sri Lanka, but maybe some of them can be applicable to other rice growing countries, but mostly allowed in Sri Lanka, right? So we are going to look at the classification of rice varieties, and we also call them as cultivars, right? Cultivars. The reason is that the term cultivar means that that's a cultivated variety, right? Cultivated variety. So that's why we use this term called cultivars, similar to the variety. But cultivar is more specific because when you cultivate a variety for a long term, its genetic makeup is kind of stabilized. So you will not have much variations, right? Much variation when you continue to grow that particular variety, right? So the cultivar, the term represent the varieties which have more stabilized genetic makeup, right? Or genetics, right? So when you continue to cultivate, the variations would be minimal. And this one, right? We have one major rice breeding center in the country, that is in Battala, right? And also we have the regional centers, few regional centers where the rice breeding is done. So based on the breeding centers, also you can classify the varieties, right? Varieties. So these are the three factors that we use, right, to classify rice varieties or varieties. Is that clear to you? What are the three factors we use?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then we will go into detail, right? So the classification based on the crop improvement, right? Improvement, right? So now you know the history of evolution of cultivated rice, right? So we said that we had two cultivated species, right? In which we so if I go back just to remind about this one, right? The rice sativa is the one this cultivated species in our country, right? So this cultivated species in Africa. Okay. So the rice sativa and under the rice sativa we have the rice sativa indica. Okay. So that's the cultivated species. So this cultivated species earlier had before we start any interventions genetically, right, to improve this crop. What we had is the traditional varieties, right? So traditional varieties, sometimes they call as conventional type of conventional varieties as well, because this term conventional is similar to the traditional, right? But we used in the past, right? So those are the traditional varieties before improvement, right? We had, and then this improvement, the crop improvement in rice took place through several steps, right? Several steps. So you can through this, the passage of this crop improvement, you can identify two types of improved varieties, right? two types of improved varieties. One is called as old improved varieties, right? OI, right? After the traditional varieties, through improvement, we developed these old improved varieties. So abbreviated as OIV. Okay. And then from the old improved varieties with time, right? We used several breeding techniques, right? We developed the newly improved varieties, right? Abbreviated as NIV. Okay. So these newly improved varieties, the main target, right, to develop these newly improved varieties, increasing the yield, right, increasing the yield. So they sometimes they can be called as high yielding varieties as well. So these high yielding varieties can be abbreviated as HYV, right? HYV, right? So when you encounter this abbreviation, you should be able to find out what they mean, right? These are very often we use these abbreviations, right? So this is the classification based on the crop improvement, and also this this classification you can relate with Hello, students. Can you hear me? Sorry for that interruption. There's something control. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's clear, right? So this is what happened with the time also, right? Earlier we had our old types, traditional varieties. Then we had these old improved varieties, right? And then the newly improved varieties or high yielding varieties, right? Is that clear to you? So how we classify based on the crop improvement? Students, is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, then let's move to the classification based on age group, right? So I told, right, what we mean by age group is the crop duration. So crop duration we account from the day, right? You plant the crop, right, to the until the harvest, right, until the harvest. So that's the crop duration, right? So in this table, we have three groups based on their age or crop duration. We can classify, right? So the first one is you can say the short age varieties, right? Short age varieties. So that their crop duration is in terms of months, right? 2.5 to 3.5, right? So that's why I put 2.5 to 3.5. Right? It's actually the 2.5 month to 3.5 month, right? And then for examples, right? Example Colomosurian, right? Short age varieties you can provide most of the newly improved varieties, right? That's why we use this abbreviation NIV, right? So most of the newly improved varieties develop short age varieties, but we also have some newly improved varieties under the medium age group, right? Medium age group, right? That you should know, right? And so other varieties are mostly the I mentioned as example are traditional. traditional ones, right? Okay, so the traditional example you can say that Pacha Perumal, right? That's comes under the short age, right? And then if you go to the medium age, right, that ranges from 4 months to 4.5 months, right? That's the duration, right? So these are the examples. Again, two types of traditional varieties, Langayan and Murungakai, right? So those are the traditional varieties can be given example for medium age group. Medium age group. As I said, there are few newly improved varieties also available, right? And that is medium age, maybe 4 months or 4.5 months. Okay. And then we have the long age group, right? That is about more than 5 months or maybe 5 to 6 months, right? That's 6 months is kind of maximum you can say the crop duration for. So these are mostly traditional, right? Traditional types, right? They take longer time, right? To mature, right? So like Mavi, right, and 40V, right? These are the example traditional rice variety example you can give, right? So this Mavi, one of the popular traditional variety earlier, right, cultivated during the Maha season in the country, right? So there's a reason why it's cultivated during Maha season, right? I will tell in the upcoming slides, right? So this classification is now based on the age, right? Age. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then we have the classification based on the breeding center where this crop improvement occurred, right? Crop improvement occurred. So unfortunately, we don't have. I don't have this map in English version, but it's in. It has both Tamil and Sinhala, right? Languages, the names of the centers, right? In the center, right? We have the Bathalogada, right? Bathalogada, that is the rice research and development center we have, right? So we call as, so that's kind of a leading center, right, in the country, right? This, so the main center, right, for rice crop improvement, initially they established in Mahailapallama, right? But because of the lack of water availability, so they shifted this location to the Batanagar, right? So now we have the Rice Research and Development Center is in Batalagoda. So the varieties developed by that center is denoted by these two letters BG, right? BG, okay? And then we have the regional centers, right? Regional centers. We have one in Bombuala, right? And then we have in Bentota, Labudua, right? Ambalantota, Sammanturai, right? And then Murungan and Paranga, right? So these are the regional centers for rice crop improvement. But you should remember, not all these regional centers develop varieties, right? Develop varieties. So whichever the center has developed a variety, right? That is named with the letter belongs to that particular breeding center. For example, if it is Bombuwala, that's BWD, right? If it is from Ambalantota, that's AT, right? So if it is from Labudua, right, it should be LD, right? I think both, there should be a, let me, can you see it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it should be like first is capital and then small, right? So BG3 present the Batalokuda, Bombuela BW, and then Ambalando TAT and Labu LD, right? So if other centers develop, then they will definitely name based on those centers, right? So fun, right? So this is the classification based on the breeding centers, right? Where these varieties develop, okay? So this classification you should know, right? With that, classification, we will move to the rice improvement program in Sri Lanka. Okay. Are there any questions so far in the classification system? Anyone want to ask anything? Okay, in the absence of questions, right? So that we said that, we classify based on the crop improvement and then based on age group and based on breeding centers. Okay. So, so these classifications mostly applied to our country, right? Our country. But this first classification, right, based on the crop improvement, right? This happened not only in Sri Lanka, but across many rice growing countries, right? So this classification may be familiar in many rice growing countries, right? Maybe in India or Philippines or maybe in Vietnam, Bangladesh, right? They may be familiar with this classification system. But this classification based on age group may be familiar or may not. But this based on breeding centers is specific to our country. It's only applicable to Sri Lanka. Right. So that is the message I want to give there. And then let's move to the rice improvement program. Right. So all these interventions for this rice improvement program began in late 1940s, maybe closer to the independence, so-called independence, right? Sri Lanka got independence in 1948, somewhere closer to that, right? Or maybe a little bit, few years before that, right? During that period, right, these varietal improvement programs began, right? So, but before that, before this, uh, this improvement program start, right? But we had this traditional rice varieties, so maybe you can call them as conventional varieties, right? Conventional varieties. So initially we had traditional rice varieties, right? So what I was introduced to Sri Lanka is traditional, right? Traditional, right? So before improvement, we had traditional, right? Then, right, I said that in late 1940s, scientists and administrators they started working on these varietal improvement programs, right? So with this crop improvement program, so this occurred in parallel to the Green Revolution, right? You may heard the term Green Revolution, right? This happened in the world, right? In the world. So in parallel to the Green Revolution, right? This crop improvement program started, right? So we developed old improved varieties and then followed by newly improved varieties. So what we mostly cultivate now is the newly improved varieties in IVs, right? In the country, it's around 99%, right? So what we cultivate is newly improved varieties, right? Okay, so this overview, right? We will study in a little bit more detail, right? Step by step, right? But this is kind of an overall view of rice improvement program in Sri Lanka. Am I audible to you, students? Because
Yes,
I
sir.
am getting a message that internet connection is unstable. Okay, good. That's fine. So we want to little bit have an understanding about the green revolution, right? That happened in the world, and also this is very important. As agriculture graduates, you should know what happened during the green revolution. Right? Before we go there, right? Let's try to understand, right? What are the problems we had with this traditional rice varieties? Because with money and time for the improvement, right? For the improvement, right? If the traditional rice varieties or earlier we had, if they are performing okay, right? If they are performing okay, we don't want to go for improvement, right? So then why, what are the problems we had with these traditional rice varieties? So that, motivated the scientists and other people to work on crop improvement, right? So let's try to understand what are the problems we had with these traditional rice varieties. Okay. So everything started, right? This with increasing population, right? Not only Sri Lanka, throughout the world, right? When our facilities increase, like for example, the health facilities, right? And everything, our life expectancy has increased, right? And also the child mortality and everything, right? So and because of that, the human population has increased rapidly, right? So we had no other way, right, rather than feeding those increasing mouths, right, increasing mouths. The other option is, right, what you want to do is, if you don't have enough food, there will be obviously problems. People will fight, right? People will fight, and then they will die, right? We should not allow, right? So our education also increased, right? The innovations increased. So with that, people thought to find out solutions um, by which we can increase the food production, right? So we can feed those increasing population, right? So to feed those increasing population, right? The production from the traditional varieties, not only from rice, right? From other crops as well, right? The production was limited, right? Because these traditional varieties, they mostly produce lower yields, right? Lower yields. So that was the problem with these traditional varieties, not only for rice but also for other crops. But let's try to find out what are the issues to produce, increasing yield from these traditional rice varieties. Okay. Right. So, so these traditional rice varieties, they are mostly the long duration crops, right? So most of the traditional rice varieties, um, you can classify them under the long age groups, right? Long age groups. So their duration was so long, right? Taking more than 5 months, right? And then they are late, maturing late, right? So then to produce one season of crop, right? It takes a lot of time. Yeah, it takes a lot of time, right? And then they are taller plants, right? They are usually taller plants and then weak, right? Their anatomy is weak, right? So therefore they're susceptible to lodging. I don't know you are familiar with this term, the lodging. Let me highlight that one, right? So lodging means like you can imagine a rice crop, right? It's a grass, right? It's a grass, right? So now when they grow taller, right? When they grow taller, they will try to fall apart, right? This in one plant we will have several tillers, right? So that's how grasses are there, right? So they will have tillers, right? So their main stem and the tillers, right? They fall apart, right? So that's called logic, right? Because they grow taller, right? So they cannot tolerate, the maybe flooding or maybe winds, right? So because they are weak also, right? They are weak, so they are susceptible to logic, right? So when they lodge, right? Their production will go down, and then it's very difficult to harvest. All kind of problems are there. And then they have this thick culm, right, and larger leaves and larger roots, right, larger roots. So culm means like in grasses, right, it's kind of a mainstay, right. In grasses, we use this technical term you can imagine middle stem or maybe the center axis of a dipod plant, something like that. You can so in the middle of the plant, we will have this cut, right? It's kind of a mainstay, right, for the grass, right? And then they will have larger leaves, but these leaves, like they are not erect, right? So maybe I can draw here, right? So these leaves are larger, right? They will look like this. They are droopy, right? They will fall like this, right? Something like this. Can you see this drawing?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it's like that. So they are larger leaves, but they bend and droop, right? And then they also have larger roots, right? Larger roots. Um, but because of this structure, right? So we call it as architecture. We have several problems that I will briefly let you know, right? This is sometimes more difficult for you to understand at this stage, right? And then they are sensitive to photoperiod, right? These traditional varieties, they were sensitive to the photoperiod. So sensitive photoperiod means like when you are in the equator, closer to equator, right, in the country like Sri Lanka, right, we usually have equal daytime and night, right? So we 12 hours of night time. Are you agree with me? In Sri Lanka, we have more or less equal daytime and night time. Hello, students.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So you can agree with me, right? So, but some plants, right, they are sensitive to this duration of light. So that's we call as photoperiod sensitivity. Right? So when I tell, because everything is in the notes, everything is not in the notes, so you have to take that, right? So that's why I already in the first class I told, right? So the duration of light will affect their development, right? So these traditional rice varieties are short day plants, right? Short day plants means like they need shorter days to flower, right? Shorter days to flower. So that means like less than 12 hours of light duration is required for them to flower, right? So that is the sensitivity. So only in Sri Lanka, like in the Maha season only, right? Mostly we have shorter days, right? Shorter data, right? You think about the months of like November, December, January, that time, right? We will have that shortness, right? So only in the Maha season we were able to grow these rice varieties since they are sensitive to photoperiod. Otherwise, they don't flower, right? So without flowering, you cannot expect the yield, grains and yield, right? So that was another problem. And then most of these traditional varieties were susceptible to pest and disease. Give 1 minute, I will be back. Okay. There was a was another problem, right? There are a lot of pests and diseases in rice, right? And then they are like less nitrogen response, right? So that means, right, these traditional varieties, right, even though you add nitrogen fertilizers, they don't perform better, right? Because they are happy with whatever they have in the soil, right? But on the other hand, they produce lower yields, right? They produce lower yields. So lower yields, okay? They are not responsive to nitrogen, right? Because they don't use it. Even though if you apply nitrogen fertilizers externally, they will not use it, right? So that's what we mean by the less responsiveness, right? Because of these reasons, their yield was lower, right? So then, how with the low yield, right? Right? How we can keep increasing population, right? So there should be interventions to improve these varieties, right? So that's a time where people thought about, right? People thought about it. Is that clear, right? What are the drawbacks we had with the traditional rice varieties? Is it clear to you?
Yes,
Any
sir.
questions? Any interesting comments or questions if you want to ask? No, right? Sure. Okay. So that was all the problems we had with the rice variety. So then this in the world, and there are a lot of incidences of famine, right? Maybe I can write it here. You can read about this one because I am going to give an exercise for you to work on it. So we call it as famine, right? This means people go hungry without food, right? And then they die also. Right? There were several incidences happened in the world because the population was increasing. We didn't have enough food, right? And then there were large incidences of these pests and diseases that destroy the crop at large scales. So because of that, the long-term food shortages evolved, right? So because of all those sort of reasons, right? People were they died. They have died because of the lack of food, right? That was the pathetic situation we had in many parts of the world, right? So this revolution started in late 1960s, right? So can anyone have some understanding about this one? Anyone want to talk at least a few points regarding this one? Did you heard this term, students? AG004. I don't know where people are. Like it seems they are joining, but AG010 DSRV.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so do you know about this one before?
Sorry, no, sir.
Okay, that's fine. If you don't know, that's fine. But important thing is you respond, right? Okay, so I will give this as an independent learning, right? Because this is important for you, right? This green revolution occurred, right? In late 1960s, right? So that's the period we say that green revolution, right? So as an independent learning, so I want to assign this well, right? Use the online resources to read about the history of the green revolution. Brief, right? There are a lot of resources available, right? And its major breakthroughs in rice crop, right? And then prepare one-page report based on your reading, and then submit. You have to submit your report to LMS or no before 25 July, right? So I will give 1 week for you to do this task, right? So I will create the assignment in the LMS, right? And then I will email the budget, right? When it's available, right? So you can upload the report. Maybe as a Word document or PDF, right? So it should not be more than one page, and the line spacing should be 1.5, right? Line spacing should be 1.5, right? Not 2 or not less than that. Is that clear? Your task is clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's, but I want to explain as well, right, what happened in the Green Revolution, right? Because this rice crop improvement in Sri Lanka, right, occurred in parallel to this one, right? So I said that, right, we had, right, large scale famine, and then our population was increasing, and then people were dying, right? We had no other option rather than feeding them, right? So to feed, we had to increase the crop production, right? So that was the ultimate target, right? Ultimate target. So the people worked on it, right? One of the important person, right? We all credit him, right, as the father of Green Revolution is the Dr. Norman Borlaug, right? He was an American scientist, right? So he worked on especially the important cereal crop, that's the wheat, right? That's the wheat crop, right? He made the improvement through genetic intervention, right? So this Green Revolution sort of started with the wheat, right? But immediately after these interventions started, right, in the Asian region, the major food crop was rice, right? Major food crop was rice, right? So this revolution, right, also moved to the Asian region, right? Asian region where the rice improvement occurred, right? The rice improvement occurred. But the cereal crop improvement, right, kind of wheat also cereal, right? Cereal crop is a grass, right? So when they improve that crop genetically, right, they might have more or less similarities in what features they have been improved, right? They have been improved, right? So kind of this revolution has been copied to the Asian region by the people in that region, right? You may when you read about this, right, especially the Green Revolution in rice, one of the remarkable person for the Asian region is Dr. Swaminathan, right? So he is an Indian scientist, right? He's still alive, I think, right? So he he worked on rice, the rice improvement, right? So what they have done was, right, they have we said that this these traditional varieties are problematic because they are tall, they are susceptible to dodging, they are susceptible to pest and diseases, right? They are sensitive to photoperiod, they are taking longer time, right? Longer time. So they wanted to change these things in a way that they can increase the yield, right? So that is the ultimate target, right? Increasing the yield or production, right? The total production, right? Per unit resource, or maybe obviously the land area, right? So that they thought of about improving, right? So in the Green Revolution, right? So the genetic improvement happened, right? In major cereal crops, primarily to increase the yield, right? That is kind of ultimate target, right? Ultimate target. So by doing anything, let's increase the yield because they have to feed the population because people are dying, right? So that's a very critical issue, right? People are dying because of hunger, right? So we have to increase the yield uh, by any sort of improvement, right? Um, so then they developed this sort architecture plants because earlier traditional rice varieties are taller, right? Taller. So when they are taller, they are very susceptible to this logic. And also they were developing this short duration crops, right? Because Earlier, the traditional varieties taking longer time to produce the yield, right? So they also thought, but let's reduce the duration, right? So if we reduce the duration, right, we can have maybe two crops in 1 year, right? 2 seasons, right? We can have two crops in 1 year, or maybe three crops, right? If the water is available, um, we can have three crops per year, right? If we can reduce, because earlier it was those traditional varieties, the age is more than 5 years, 5 months, right? 5 months. So then it's very difficult for you to have like two crops, right? Within 1 year, right? So then they thought, let's reduce to maybe three or maybe 3.5 months, right? Then we'll have maybe three crops or two crops, right? If you have two crops per year, then we studied that the cropping intensity is 200%, right? If the water is available, you can go for three crops, right? Then your cropping intensity will be 300%, right? So that's very good, right? You can increase the production. And also, when they develop the salt architecture plants, right, they have these erect leaves, right? I will show the picture, right, how they look like this newly, uh, the improved varieties, how they look like based on their architecture. Right? They have erect leaves, so they are not susceptible to lodging. And also, when they have erect leaves, right, when you come to the advanced courses like maybe crop physiology, you will study that their overall photosynthesis also high. Right? I don't want to go into that much detail at this level, right? So because of this architecture, the overall photosynthesis is also high, right? Then they can fix the carbon, right? And then they will produce the yield, high yield, right? Then because the short duration, right? So we develop varieties suitable for irrigated cultivation, right? When we have irrigated cultivation, we were able to increase the cropping intensity. Like I said, mostly 200%, or maybe to 300%, right? 300%. We can have, if we can have three crops in 1 year, right? When you have irrigation, right? That's obviously increasing the cropping intensity, right? So that's why they try to reduce its duration, reduce the duration. And also, when you develop a variety with high performance, right? High performance, obviously it's require, right? You can understand, obviously it require high inputs, right? High inputs, right? Because in English, in English, we say that beautifully, we say that there's no free lunch, right? No free lunch. We say that, we used to say that. Like that, when you try to increase the yield, right? That's a production of grains, right? From this rice, right? Their fertilizer responsiveness also went up, right? So obviously you had to apply a lot of fertilizer, especially nitrogen, right? Because I said that the overall photosynthesis is increasing because of this architecture, right? Then they require fertilizer, especially the nitrogen, right? Nitrogen fertilizer. And then their harvest index increased, right? Now what is harvest index. I explained this in very first day, right? So their harvest index also increased, and then their tolerance to pest and diseases also increased through this improvement, right? And then because of this, all these, right? As I said, there's no free lunch, right? So when you increase the yield, obviously you had to supply the inputs, right? The inputs, purchases, services, right? Services, right? Even though they are tolerant, right? Not all are tolerant, right? And these pest and disease problems are like with their species evolving time to time differently, right? So because of we have to apply sustain. And then another important thing you should know is So because of that, with the traditional varieties, we had right because beliefs because of the those crops, right? Hello, students. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's clear now, no? There was an interruption. There's an interruption. I don't know what's happening in this internet. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I was talking about right these improved varieties are they can tolerate pests and diseases, right? Was that clear up to this point? Was that clear to you? Right. Then I was discussing about this wheat crop. Right? In the traditional varieties, we had high wheat problems, but sorry, low wheat problems. But when you improve because of the short architecture and the direct leaves, there can be like spaces right in between plants. And because of that, wheat problems was high with these improved varieties, right? So because of that, we had to apply like a lot of herbicides, right, or weedicides. So we said that right, there's no free lunch. So since we improved the yield, right, we had to supply these inputs, right, including several agrochemicals like fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, right. So can you see this picture?
Yes, sir.
So this is kind of a comparison. Now you can see between traditional variety and an improved variety, right? So I said the traditional varieties they are taller, right? They have these droopy leaves, right? So they are very susceptible to lodging, right? Since they also have a lot of leaves, right? A lot of leaves in them. So because of that, so when the weeds are there, right, the weed growth will be minimum with this one. But since these improved varieties are erect, right? Erect in nature, right? And then they are short, right? They're short. There's no doubt, right? But the one problem was that the weed problems was high. And because of that, we had to apply herbicides, and then if they are vulnerable to several pests and diseases, we had to apply pesticides. And then since we are increasing the yield, right, we have to apply fertilizers. So that's the reason why, right, in Sri Lanka, when you ban suddenly these agrochemicals, there's a clear drop, right, clear drop in the productivity of rice. Because now around 98-99% we cultivate are the improved varieties, newly improved varieties. So they are right high yielding, right? They are responsive, highly response to the fertilizers, especially nitrogen. So they encounter several pests and diseases. So we have wheat problems, right? Without these inputs, right? It's very difficult to maintain the yield level, right? Without these proteins, right? That's why we had a total failure because of this wrong policy decision, right? So that's That's you can understand this one, right? So so if we had traditional varieties, somehow we were able to manage. But the problem is that with the traditional varieties, we cannot feed that population, right? Because the production is less, right? So that's why even though we say about a lot of environmental problems, health problems, right? Because of this input intensive agriculture, right? That evolved through this green revolution. Um, Somehow we are trying to manage and have this system because we have no other option so far, right? Because otherwise people will go hunger, right? And then they will die, right? So the question is whether we are going to allow them to die, or maybe we are going to we can try to manage these environmental implications. Right? So with that, I will end this lecture because we want to go the lecture, and then we can meet next week. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.